For example, hookup culture, which can begin as early as middle school, seems to demand that girls give boys oral pleasure without getting anything in return. So friends with benefits may not bring much of a benefit to girls. This doesn't improve when you get to college. In a study done by Paula England and her colleagues, they conducted a very large online survey of undergrads at 21 U.S. colleges and universities, and then after that, they drew on 85 in-depth interviews with both men and women at 2 universities. So their aim was to explain the gender pleasure gap in casual sex, i.e. hooking up, and why it greatly diminishes in committed relationships. 11% of women report experiencing orgasm during hookups, compared with 67% of women in a relationship. That's just an enormous pleasure gap. And they blame it in part on a double standard for pleasure. Both genders question women's but not men's entitlement to pleasure during hookups, but believe strongly in women's entitlement to pleasure in relationships. As a result, more attention to female orgasm is paid by men and women in relationships versus hookups. That is, loving couples engage in practices conducive to female pleasure more than casual sex partners do. For example, they use more stimulation, whether oral, manual, or using vibrators. Sexual inequality, the notion that men are more entitled to orgasm than women, signals how incomplete the women's movement is. In addition, the rampant sexual objectification of girls and women continues apace. It's as though the women's movement never happened in this respect. Every year, another content analysis of the media comes out, and every year it's the same old story. Women are more sexually objectified today compared with the past. And just in case you're curious about what's going on with this ad, I'll show you the full ad for what you might have thought was for turkeys, stoves, or women's underwear. It's in fact for male deodorant. So, like I said, they'll take any product at all and use women in a sexualized manner to sell it. And this just makes no sense to me. Moreover, this is sort of the thesis of Ariel Levy's book, Female Chauvinist Pigs. Because so many young women equate sex with power, they're not concerned about the state of affairs. On the contrary, many seem to revel in it. But taking the long view, it appears that whenever women resort to using their sexuality as a substitute for real power, it doesn't increase their status in society. So what to do? On the one hand, we want girls and women to feel just as free to explore sex as men. On the other hand, if they aren't just as free, thanks to the sexual double standards, then we may be encouraging them to take risks we would rather protect them from. So what will you do if you have a daughter? My dad, he had 5 daughters, and he and my mom were shooting for a son, and they just kept not pulling up blanks, but coming up with girls. And by the time my baby sister Wendy was born, the doctor looked at my dad and said, "God must think you're a special man, Mr. Rudman." And what he meant, according to my dad, is that it's a lot harder to raise girls than boys, and it has all to do with the sexual double standards. So how to protect girls? When my niece turned 15, her dad was horrified to find she'd been posting pictures of herself topless on the internet. Her argument, everyone's doing it, Daddy. You have to in order to be popular. So already she'd learned the mythical equation that acting sexy equals power for her gender. Clearly, we want our daughters to grow up with a healthy interest in sexual pleasure without exploitation. But sex education in the U.S. is woefully lacking in worthwhile information. And even today, the science of sex is embryonic. What Do Women Want is the title of a New York Times article focusing on the research of female sexologists. Sexologists used to be all men, with the exception of Masters and Johnson, a married couple, until very recently. One female sexologist was inspired to pursue her career because she asked a male researcher why he didn't study women's sexuality. His answer, "I'm a man. How the hell should I know anything about women?" So Meredith Chivers rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Since that time, a handful of other brave vanguards have joined her ranks. What have they learned? Well, the common methodology is to have subjects watch various types of imagery while hooked up to plethysmographs. For men, it's an apparatus that gauges penile swelling. For women, it's a little plastic probe that sits in the vagina, and by bouncing light off the vaginal walls, it measures genital blood flow. Participants are also given a keypad so that they can rate how aroused they feel while watching erotic imagery. That's the way self-reports of arousal are measured. So should the two things go together? Should what people say turns them on correspond to what their bodies are doing? What do you think? Yes or no? Well, the answer is it depends on their gender. Results for men, their ratings from the keypad match their physiology almost exactly. Men know what turns them on and are unabashed about reporting it. I mean, the correlation is like 0.90. What turns them on is watching heterosexual sex or lesbian sex, and also watching women masturbating or even exercising. Results for women, strong physical arousal, whether they viewed women with men, women with women, or men with men. However, they reported much more arousal when viewing women with men. So as a result, there was no correspondence between their physical and self-reported responses. Mind and genitals seem scarcely to belong to the same person. So what's going on? Describing her ambition to understand the workings of women's arousal and desire, Chivers said, "I feel like a pioneer at the edge of a giant forest. There's a path leading in, but it isn't much." She suggests that because women's physical arousal is less visible than men's, women themselves may be out of touch with what turns them on. But it turns out that measurement problems are the key to the mystery. Blood flow to the vagina is simply a bad way of measuring women's sexual arousal. Women can't feel it. When you use thermography, which is a measure of genital heat, something women can feel, the correspondence between what women say turns them on and their body's arousal jumps to that same high level as men. Correlation 0.90 or higher. Lisa Diamond is another pioneer who has followed the sex lives of hundreds of women longitudinally. In her book, Sexual Fluidity, Understanding Women's Love and Desire, she argues that women are more turned on by emotional connections to individuals than by a fixed set of criteria, such as their mate's gender. For example, Anne Heche lived with Ellen DeGeneres for 2 years, despite no previous lesbian interests, and then she married a man. Diamond says that sexual fluidity is more the norm for women than for men because women are attracted to the person no matter their gender. By contrast, emotional intimacy or closeness isn't much of an aphrodisiac, according to Marta Mina, a sexologist at the University of Nevada. She argues that what women want is to be desired passionately, without reservation or inhibition. In Mina's research, heterosexuals wear goggles that track eye movement while looking at pictures of heterosexual foreplay to measure visual attention. She finds that men stare almost exclusively at the females, women's faces and bodies, and they hardly ever look at the men. Women gaze equally at both genders, their eyes drawn to the faces of the men and to the bodies of the women, to the facial expressions of aroused men and to what he's aroused by, the sexual allure of the female body. Mina's couples research shows that although bad relationships often kill sexual desire, good ones don't guarantee it. Contrary to Diamond's thesis that intimacy leads to better sex for women, Mina argues that women's desire is dominated by the wish to be the object of erotic admiration and sexual need. Why? Well, she finds that women lose interest in sex before their partners do, so women may need more of a jolt to become aroused. If I don't love cake as much as you, Mina says, my cake better be kicked butt to get me excited to eat it. The fact that women are less likely to orgasm during sex, even in committed relationships. Remember, 67% of women report that they have orgasms during sex, but if you look at what heterosexual men say, it jumps up to like 92, 93%, which is about the same as gay men, and almost identical to lesbians, who 89% of them say they almost always have orgasms when they have sex. So it's still the case that of all these groupings, heterosexual women are not coming as frequently as everybody else. So if that's the case, then it's probably one reason why they don't love cake as much as men do. Furthermore, within a committed relationship, the crucial stimulus of being desired, it goes down considerably, not only because the woman's partner loses a modicum of interest, but also, more importantly, Mina says, because the woman feels that her partner is trapped, that is, a choice, the choice of choosing her, is no longer being carried out. So she gets more excited by the idea that he has to have her and not that he already has her. If Mina's right, then the cultural norm of women working overtime to be attractive to men, after all, lingerie sales never flag, even in poor economic times, it would seem to have it exactly backward. Instead, it's men who should be pulling out all the stops to get the attention of their partners. But in fact, it sort of does make sense if women wish to drive their men to distraction, to heighten their partner's desire to the point of no control, because this is what turns women on. Is this Victoria's real secret? Notably, whenever I teach about sex, I tell students that women are turned off by men's chronic desire for sex. If men just took MC Hammer's advice, you can't touch this, I bet they'd be a lot more successful. And every time I hear back from men that it worked on their girlfriends. So why is that? Well, because men are less discerning sexually than women, their sort of chronic need for sex isn't connected to their desire for a specific woman. Like a compliment too freely given, sex loses its value when it's given to just about anyone. In other words, horn dogs aren't sexy. Plus, when a man plays hard to get, a woman gets to try on the role of seducer, which any man will tell you is a powerful turn-on. One thing I've learned is that we don't know much at all yet about what women want, and it's insulting to posit that all women would want something similar. But a huge barrier to scientific understanding is the fact that women are held to stricter sexual standards than men, which creates problems with their ability to know what they actually want, as well as to freely report what they want if they figure it out. The one thing we do know from decades of marital research is that gender equality is one of the best predictors of marital satisfaction and stability, both at the level of the couple and at the level of societies. Thus, really, the best thing you can do for your close relationships is to be enlightened about gender. My dearest wish is that taking this course helps you on that journey. I want to end with just a little note about next week. There's no lecture because the assigned reading is long. Baumeister and Twenge argue that only women are responsible for the sexual double standard. Do you agree, or do you think the authors missed some important points? You'll be tempted to say both genders are to blame for the sexual double standard and therefore for repressing female sexuality. But for purposes of the assignment, you must vote for women or men. I'm going to kind of let you off the hook and say you have to vote for them as the primary culprit, right? So it's Baumeister and Twenge completely let men off the hook. They exonerate them 100% and say it's only women who suppress women sexually, right? I'm going to let you not have to say it's only one or the other, but rather that either men or women are the primary culprit, and explain your reasoning. And this is important. There are no correct answers, so feel free to be persuaded by the paper or not. Just tell me why. Okay, and I'll look forward to seeing what you come up with when that assignment comes due.